Okay, we're live. We're going to let people come in. We're going to play a little guitar, and then we're going to talk about whatever we're going to talk about. Okay, that's always going to be the nature of these things, starting now until I make a decision to do something otherwise. Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. I'm just continuing to play guitar while people come in. I am not a very good guitar player, but I do enjoy it very much, and that, as you will learn, is all that matters. Okay, hello, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Let me put this aside. Hello, welcome, 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 welcome. So first thing I'm going to talk about is kind of interesting, actually, is if you notice here, you can see my hand, one of my fingers is like bent to the side. This is because many years ago when I was doing jiu-jitsu, I maybe broke my finger at that time, um, sparring at that time. Now, of course, you just have to continue training and you finish doing the drills that day, but my finger never really healed the right way. And so as a result, it's kind of difficult at first, or at least it was difficult for me, to play stringed instruments again, bass, guitar, things like this. Um, so what I did as a way of sort of addressing this was I took a shoebox and I put a mirror in it, and I placed my right hand inside the shoebox and started to move my hand like this. And because the mirror was there, I could see a reflection of it, which, because our hands are chimeral, made it look like my left hand was moving appropriately. Now, understand at the time that what happened was this finger would always do that and remain apart from my middle finger. But what I learned to do by watching my right hand close and open, I learned how to move my left hand in the same way by watching the reflection of it. I had my left hand covered, so I couldn't do this. So I'd have both hands in, closing one, closing the other, and over time, I was able to learn how to move my left hand in a way that allowed me to play stringed instruments again. Now I bring this up because I'm going to keep moving around because it just makes it easier for me to talk to you. It's a little easier to deal with talking to you live like this. Um, Now, what happens when you do that is you're learning something. Your nervous system is changing. Your neurons are wiring together in some different way. And that allows you to move in a different way. And one of the things that's really important to me is to begin to merge the different audiences and people that are interested in what I talk about and what I do by allowing for everybody, whether or not you do jujitsu or not, to at least understand what is occurring when you see jujitsu or when you observe it. So, what I'd like to do this evening um, is to just talk about a couple ideas and examples that I think are really easy to understand. And if we do talk about them, I think make it possible for somebody who doesn't do jujitsu or maybe even never does to understand what that might be like. And then in addition, maybe we can expand on that and talk about some other ideas. So the first thing I want you to uh, think about is imagine I came up to you, and I wish I had some with me, but imagine I came up to you and I showed you a piece of sheet music, a piece of paper with music on it that a pianist might use in order to play a composition. And I said to you, this is an amazing song. I really love this song. And I showed you the sheet music and I was saying this to you. You might go, that's really strange. Why are you saying that to me? If you played music, you might, and you read sheet music, you might understand that a little bit differently. But if you didn't, then that might be a very strange way to approach you about the concept of music. And that's understandable because music is something that we hear. Music is something that we hear, we experience a sound. And sheet music is a visual, codified way of understanding music that allows for people from hundreds of years ago to bring forward in time music and allow for people now to play it and experience it and things like this. And so sheet music is a visual way of codifying something that we learn and hear. And that's really important because there are many expressions of this. For example, some of you may play chess. And in chess, there's a very consistent codified system for what move is being made, what are the various openings of chess. This is all knowledge that if you play chess quite a bit, you come to recognize and you probably come to study. Now, something very interesting is that this does not exist in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It exists in sports even like judo, which have been around for a long time and have had become codified in the writings of the founder Jigoro Kano. In Kodokan Judo, the textbook he wrote, where he goes through the various throws, he says are the basics of the sport, the various movements, the ways you turn, everything from stance to the manner in which you turn is given a name, and that allows for people to abstract these concepts and communicate about them and learn about them. But that didn't happen in jiu-jitsu. And you would think, well, it's so popular, it's so competitive, why wouldn't that happen? Why didn't that happen? And the answer to that, I think, is largely in part based on the fact that in 1993 is when, as I was talking about the other day, the Netscape Navigator and the UFC both were available to the public. And so what happened was people that were interested in jiu-jitsu and wanted to know who to train with would search online and they would find whoever the current world champion was, and they would go to that person to try and train with them. And that's reasonable. That's what you would do because you think, okay, I want to learn this fighting style. Who should I go to? You go to the person who's proven that they're pretty good at it. Now, the thing was a lot of people that were teaching jiu-jitsu at the time were not from the United States. They were from Brazil. And so they were still learning English and they were learning to speak English as they were teaching, which is wonderful. But you'll notice in jiu-jitsu, a lot of the naming conventions for techniques reflect this. Things like a certain lock on the arm being called an Americana, whereas this would be called a twisting arm lock or an udegetame or a kimura in the sport of judo. A lot of the names for things in jiu-jitsu are very colloquial. They're very based on just where you happen to train or who you happen to train with or who they happen to train under. That kind of gives you the naming convention that they're going to use. And there's not a big problem with that initially. But the problem occurs when you try to have a unified body of knowledge that can then be transferred through generations of students. And now those of you that do jujitsu and those of you that don't do jujitsu will all be able to understand that there is a desire in large part in jujitsu for there to be a sort of unified set of standards. What does it mean to be a blue belt or a purple belt or a brown belt or a black belt? And I think that I have a pretty good standard for this, which I'd love to talk to you about. But the reason that doesn't exist is not because it's impossible. It's simply because it wasn't necessary to be done. It's useful to have it done, but there are many musicians who are wonderful musicians who make some really great music who cannot read sheet music. And that's fine. That's totally fine. There's no problem with that. But I think if you gave them the tools to be able to read sheet music and you return to them 10 years later, they might say, now that I know how to do this, my own expression of music is much stronger. It's much clearer. It's much easier for me to manifest. For me, a small expression of this is when I went from writing. Some of you have trained with me for 20 years, and you know I've written every single lesson down by on pen on paper, and I had my legal pads that I'd bring out on the mat and I'd write them down every day. That was very useful for me. But it was when I started. This is going to make me sound like I'm 500,000 years old. But when I started typing my lessons, is when it really expanded for me, because then I could really quickly organize all this information that I was teaching to students. And again, I'm returning to this idea of okay, there's no codified language in jiu-jitsu. There's no codified system for understanding what are we actually doing when we practice things. And changing that would allow not only people that do jiu-jitsu to get much better, but people that don't do jiu-jitsu could understand what is occurring. And that's a really powerful thing, because when you show people that they can understand something that seemed so foreign to them a moment ago, you say to them also, hey, maybe you could do even more than that. Maybe you could even learn this thing yourself. Maybe you could be a practitioner of this thing. Or maybe because you understood this thing, you don't have to do this thing, but you could understand this thing. And so now you could do this other thing that you're actually interested in, and you could now do that thing. This is why it's so important, I think, for kids to do something like jiu-jitsu, play music, play a sport, whatever. It's not that they're going to become professionals at it. That's not important. What is important is that they learn that if I want to learn a thing and I approach it every day in small, humble, bite-sized chunks, and I assess it and I try my best and I say, I will eventually get to what I'm looking for. Many adults are children who never had an experience like this and became adults thinking that they are just whatever they happen to naturally, whatever that means, come into, when instead it's more of an application of my own consciousness and knowledge and awareness that eventually gives rise to great skill and mastery and the expression of mastery through movement or whatever you happen to do. So, where to begin? Where does a lesson like this begin? Well, the first lesson is awareness. And so I'm going to speak to you just for a moment about awareness in a way that I think anybody can understand. Um, on my face, on my skull, is my chin. Okay, my chin. It's right here. Here's the middle of my chin. Okay, it's part of my jaw, my chin. My chin, the middle of it's right here. But where does it begin on my anatomy? Is it here? 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 It's somewhere here. It's not really important where it is, but it's not ever clear where precisely on your jaw your chin occurs. Here's the middle, but where's the beginning? Now, I'm pointing that out not to say, oh, well, the chin, it's obviously a useless idea because we can't clearly define where it starts and begins. No, I'm saying much the opposite of that. What I'm saying instead is that the usefulness of the chin as separate from the jaw is very, very high for people that, for example, do striking. Because if you've ever watched striking, you've heard something like, oh, you got to hit him on the chin, hit him flush on the chin. The reason for that is when somebody gets knocked out, what happens is their brain is colliding with their skull in some way. And the easiest way to make that happen in a striking scenario is to take their chin and spin their jaw by hitting their chin and spinning it like this. And that will cause them to get knocked out. So even though my chin is not clearly separated from my jaw at any distinguishable point, it's still very useful for us to say, hey, there's a part of your jaw, it's called your chin. And if you're in a striking situation and you want to knock someone out, the easiest way for that to make that happen is to hit them on their chin in a way that spins their entire jaw. So what does this mean? Well, if we were to step back for a moment and think, well, as a human being, I could be asleep. Okay, I could be asleep and dreaming, and time is essentially disconnected from my thoughts, and the content of my dreams, whatever that happens to be, will somehow just make sense to me. That's the nature of dreaming. They're very strange, they're very interesting. Different from that is to be awake, to be conscious, to not be asleep, but to be instead experiencing the stimuli of your external reality as it occurs. You are conscious when that happens. But awareness is different than being conscious, okay? There are a number of stairs behind me here. And you can probably have noticed that there are stairs behind me this whole time I've been talking. But how many stairs there are from the bottom to the top of the staircase is unknown to you until you decide to use your knowledge of counting and count them up. I'm not saying that it was inaccessible to you. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying was you were not aware of how many steps there were here until you decided to use your knowledge of counting and go, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, however many there are. The difference between consciousness and awareness, or rather I should say being conscious and awareness, is the application of knowledge. I am conscious of the fact that there are this many stairs here because I have learned long ago that this is what stairs are. But it is not until I decide to count the number of stairs that I become aware of how many there are. So we could distinguish a state of sleeping and unconsciousness, a state of awakeness, consciousness, and then a state where that consciousness has my knowledge applied to something, and that gives me an awareness. Now let's go a little bit further than that. Because when somebody says something like, I'm aware of Chinese, I'm aware of Chinese, most people are going to assume that means I'm aware of the language Chinese. I'm aware that it is a language. But let's go a little further than that, and let's think about what does it mean when somebody says, I know Chinese. Somebody says, I know Chinese, or I know Spanish, or I know any language. We don't assume they mean, oh, yeah, they know it exists. Yeah, that's what I mean. No, we assume they can now fill it in. What did you fill in with? Speak it, write it, read it, some combination thereof. Interesting that any of them would suffice. Any of them would suffice. Speaking Chinese, writing, reading it. What do they have in common? Well, they're the manifestations of that language, clearly. That's what you would say. And that's true. But what I want to ask you to do is go a little bit further than that. Because knowledge, I would argue, is always expressed as movement. Knowledge and skills human beings express as movement. When I say that I know a certain language and I speak it, I am moving my vocal cords in a way such that when I displace the air in the space between us, I make certain sounds that can be associated with conscious thoughts. And that allows me to communicate to you those conscious thoughts if we speak the same language. If I mean that I can write it and read it, it might mean that I write it with my hand and I express through symbols to you the thoughts of my conscious awareness. If I were almost completely paralyzed and I could only move one finger in such a way that I controlled a computer and thus a computer program and thus a piece of robotics that built something in the world, my knowledge, my awareness is then expressed through the movement of a single finger. And that single finger could move something within the entire world. So let's take for a second and think. We have sleeping, restful unconsciousness. Consciousness, I'm awake, I'm intaking the external stimuli from my environment. Awareness, the application of knowledge. And then the expression of awareness and knowledge as movement. Okay? Now, I'm going to pause on that. I'm going to kind of leave it at that for a moment. But what I will suggest is that awareness and movement exist like a spiral, like a helix, where they inform each other as they occur. As you become aware of something, that changes the way you interact with your external environment. That changes how you move in your external environment. That new movement or that change and alteration in movement then changes your awareness because you are taking in new stimuli. Your knowledge is changing, and as the application of that knowledge changes, as we've just established, your awareness changes. And then the way that you move again changes. And so we have a cycle occurring of awareness and movement, never apart from each other and never only one or the other, but always occurring together. And it's very important that we go to understand and learn skills. We don't separate mind and body and leave them apart as if that is what the actual universe has expressed to us. No. What we do instead is we always seek to unify things. The term yoga means to unify, to take mind and body as if they were separate things to be considered as their own topics of valiant interest, and then say, okay, now mind and now body, that we have understood them in some way that is new, our new awareness. How can we then unify them again and take this unified knowledge forward into the future and then once again affect our awareness? Okay. So I'll leave you with that tonight. Hopefully I've given you something interesting to think about, and we will return again tomorrow. Have a good evening.